Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Ghosthunter. Originally came out on the PS2, it's also playable on the PS4 and PS5, which is where I played it. So let's get into the story. You play as a cop named Lazarus. He and his partner are called to a school. He thinks it's probably just a prank, but there was a really grisly murder at that school years and years ago. And through some stumbling around investigating, he ends up unleashing a batch of ghosts, including one called like the Bloodhawk or something like that. And he's like super duper evil and you gotta stop him and he's got grand schemes and blah 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 blah. And I'm not gonna sit there and tell you that the story is necessarily terrible. It was actually, you know, it wasn't that bad. It was fairly interesting. It was more the tone that I found kind of difficult to deal with because it's really much more comedic than I was expecting. And I say comedic, but it's really not that funny. The story definitely goes for like an early 2000s, late 90s action comedy vibe and doesn't nail it at all. You may be wondering why I'm starting off October with a review of a game that's not a horror game and I'm kind of ragging on. Well, it's because I was looking for horror games. I found this and another one and I asked my friend which to play and, well, they picked this. But let's move on to the audio, and the first thing I'm gonna say is the first level of this game is so fucking weird from like an audio standpoint. The music, the sound effects in the school are all like really horror based, and yet all the dialogue and all the delivery is 100% like 90s action comedy dialogue, except for, again, not funny. And so that just leads to this weird tone. Like, the later levels do not have that vibe at all. They tend to land much more action comedy and not trying to be horror in any way, shape, or form, which works to their advantage, I would say. As for the voiceover work, I don't think it's terrible. I think it definitely works for what they're going for, but it's also not like award-winning by any stretch of the imagination. The soundtrack is actually better than I would expect overall. I think it worked well. And then I would say that for the sound effects as well. I think they work well. I think they're well done for what you're doing, and given the time that this came out, they're good enough. But let's move on to the gameplay mechanics and whatnot, and this is a much simpler game in some ways. This is a throwback to just a third-person action shooter. You can go into first-person mode, but you can't move around when you do it, which sucks and is very annoying. You have your ghost grenade, which if you throw it at a ghost, it will capture them. It also can make some of them easier to track, and it shows you the ghost's health, essentially, which is what you need to know, because you do enough damage, they will get captured. There was one level where the grenade didn't work, and there were certain enemies I didn't even realize you could actually kill, just because they were such bullet sponges, which came into play later in an annoying way. I learned later I had to kill them to progress, which was frustrating because you'd sit there and just pour rounds into them and they would not care in the slightest. Which is one thing I gotta say about this game is it does a terrible job of giving you a helping hand. And when I say helping hand, I think it's a good thing to get a bit of a hint or something like that from a game, but I don't necessarily want a game to sit there and hold my hand and guide me through every step and basically go through the motions for me. That's frustrating. But this game really struggles with even giving you a slight helping hand. There are some puzzles where I finally just had to look up a guide because the game was just like, yeah, we're not gonna tell you how to do this. You also get a spirit companion who gets their own abilities, and they don't necessarily tell you what of these abilities you need, when you need them, how to get them. There are several puzzles in this game where it's like being handed a math problem that says blank and blank equal blank, but you don't know what any of the blanks are. You don't know if it's multiplication, subtraction, division, or addition. You have no fucking clue. And while not all of the puzzles in this game work that way, there are more than a few where I had to look up a guide just to have any clue of what to do, because the game, like I said, gives you really nothing, and it's incredibly frustrating. And quite frankly, I shudder to imagine the poor individual who spent hours and hours figuring this out on their own, or if they had a guide themselves. Which that really strips away from the game as a whole. I want to be able to figure out my way through a puzzle. I want to use a guide to find items, help me get a higher level of completion, or only have to rely on it maybe occasionally, or if I want a certain outcome, something like that. But when a game is like, you're never gonna fucking progress without this guide, that's frustrating to me. As for the other gameplay elements, like I said, there's the grenade where you capture. You do get a bunch of different weapons, which again, they don't necessarily tell you the different uses for them for certain enemies. There are some enemies where your main, like, ghost-powered weapon will do great against, but then your regular old shotgun will do better against other ghost enemies. I found that very weird in this game, and I don't think it was to the game's benefit, this was, again, another thing where the game could have given you a hint. They don't really ever give you a hint that, oh, these enemies might be weak to this enemy might be weak to this. They don't give you anything like that. You get a decent variety of ghosts. It's always kind of weird when you have to do something outside of the norm to beat one of the ghosts, because most of them are beatable in very much the same way. Overall, though, I would say it's a very simplistic game from a gameplay standpoint, but there were definitely some times where the game gave me a fuck you no, which was very frustrating. There was one boss where he's being powered by generators and you have to destroy the generators, and I destroyed one and was good, and then I thought he was going to power down. He didn't, so I tried to destroy the others and they wouldn't take any damage. Probably more of a glitch, but there was some weird glitches I ran into as well. Like, I was escorting a guy and I beat the enemy who was attacking him, and yet it magically continued to attack him and kill him, so I had to restart that section, which sucked. But those were just some weird glitches I ran into. We'll move on to the controls, which they're not amazing. They really don't hold up particularly well. The aiming isn't terrible. The movement is very clunky. The control scheme is a little weird. Overall, I got used to it well enough, but just barely. And let's move on to the graphics and visuals. It's a PS2 game. It does not look great. And given the time it came out, Lazarus looks exactly like you would expect him to. I mean, really, overall, it does very much have that early 2000s aesthetic. I mean, they at least did put some work into some things that kind of impressed me, like actual reflections in the mirror. Not super common at that time, but to do it was always cool. Hell, you still don't even see that nowadays sometimes, which I find really ridiculous. I think some of the enemy designs were pretty cool, and they actually created some variety among the enemies, which I thought was well done. Not a huge amount, just the larger hulking enemies, they had a few different designs, which I liked, and I thought that was cool. A lot of them don't necessarily need any crazy fancy designs or too much variance in their designs, and they work well though. You've got your weapons, which they're all pretty... Actually, some of them are kind of well done considering the time. Some of them look a little cheesy, but they do fit with the overall aesthetic. I did like going to the different areas. I thought that was a cool thing. There's a prison, there's a spooky like mansion, there's a spooky swamp, stuff like that. I thought that was actually well done. Just giving you a bit of a variety, but something that would fit with ghosts, even though, again, not really a scary game. I think the graphics were, well, like I said, they were bad, but they're good enough to give you what you would need out of this game, which is going to lead me into the wrap-up. And the first thing I'm going to say is Americans don't say torch, we say flashlight. But then I'm also going to say, I didn't enjoy this game. I wouldn't recommend this game. I can fully understand why there is only one game in this, not even a franchise, and it never became a franchise. The game itself was actually just kind of frustrating, and having to rely on a guide to even progress, that really annoyed the shit out of me. The gameplay wasn't good enough to keep me fully engaged and wanting to continue to progress. The story was perfectly adequate. It wasn't anything special. Honestly, it just didn't lead me through it. It didn't make me want to follow. It was there and it was okay. I just looked, actually, this game had like a 7 something when it first came out, but like nowadays that just wouldn't hold up, I don't think. I played it for this, I beat it for this, and my review of it is, don't play it. Okay, in the comments down below, why don't you tell me, October's coming up. What are you excited for this October? And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one.